success. Kiwis do it for sports stars. But do we do it enough for business stars?
Having commercial success is not a sin.
The NBR's annual celebration, the Rich List, is out now. So, will the Mowbray Bros still be on top?
And that's always been the beauty, I think, of Zuru. We move really fast. We fast fail. We try things.
Editor Hamish McNichol joins us to crunch the numbers.
You've sort of got to be worth at least 100 mil just to enter the conversation.
And he reveals what our richest people believe would elevate New Zealand. Welcome to the MBR podcast. I'm Simon Shepherd. Yes, the list has been released. And this year there's more than 130 profiles, surprise newcomers and a brand new section. And what's more, in total, the listers have burst through a monetary milestone. And the long-suffering journalist overseeing the project is MBR editor Hamish McNichol. This is a huge body of work. Why do it?
We think it's really important to highlight and profile some of the country's most successful and leading business people. Collectively, they employ thousands of people. They generate, we've estimated that they're worth a collective $100 billion this year.
100 billion.
100 billion. It's a pretty
We've cracked
big
100
number.
billion.
We've cracked 100 bill. So that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That's a lot of economic activity.
Yeah.
And so we think it's important both to sort of track their progress, what they're up to. It's also important to talk to them, consider what they're thinking about. You know, many of them are political donors and the like, so they're hugely influential people.
Yes.
So it's interesting to always hear what where their thinking's at on certain things.
Well, we'll get into that in just a sec. I see it's once again called the NBR Rich List. It was called The List. Why is that?
So 2020, we parked the list for a year.
Because of
a couple
COVID.
of months after COVID. We just thought, this isn't the sort of thing people want to be reading about at the moment. So that gave us an opportunity to sort of really think about why we do this, what we want it to be about. And so we decided to, back then, 2021, rename it just The List, so dropping the Rich List. And the whole idea behind that was we wanted this to be a focus on profit and purpose, not just highlighting wealth for wealth's sake. But, we are now 4 or 5 years down the line. The ethos of the list still very much remains. It is still profit and purpose. And in each of the profiles, we do try and tell those stories. But, we also, a big theme of this year is we shouldn't be afraid of celebrating success.
Right.
And so bringing back the Rich List, calling it the Rich List again, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
But it's also just not shying away from the fact that, they are successful in what they do. As Peter Cooper, the Britomart developer, told us, commercial success is not a sin.
Yeah.
And so, it's just we're going back to the original roots, but the ethos of profit and purpose.
It has long been known as the Rich List as well.
It has
a long
been,
tradition.
there's decades of tradition there. It's what it's known as all around the world. It makes sense, but the ethos is still the same.
All right, so just quickly, what is the criteria to making it onto the Rich List?
So we have several categories: investment, tech, make and sell, so manufacturing, agribusiness, property. There's 130 people profiled this year.
130. So you started at 100, it's grown to 130.
I keep growing the list. Which is my fault.
Is that because there are more and more rich people?
Yeah, every year we
entities?
uncover sort of at least 10 newcomers. This year we've got a dozen newcomers, which is the most we've had for several years. Generally, the threshold is you've sort of got to be worth at least 100 mil just to enter the conversation. That's sort of the benchmark, $100 million valuation, which is a lot of money, but there are more than 100 people at that sort of level, which is pretty incredible.
The other thing is, though, with these people, though, I mean, it must be hard to find out or to estimate whether they are worth that 100 million. I mean, because are all the names well known, or are people very sort of private about this stuff?
Generally, people are very private, but many people on the list we've been following for a long time and have built up a lot of research and history on them. I mean, there's lots of publicly available information out there available to us beyond, just company financials, property holdings, investments, all other sorts of things. There's often clues within these businesses in terms of how much revenue they're turning over, all that sort of stuff. You can build a picture for all of these families and businesses. Plus, a lot of the companies as well are publicly listed. Quite a few of the newcomers this year are involved in companies that raised a lot of money at pretty serious valuations during the year. So we can pretty easily establish how much they're worth.
Okay, so you mentioned that part of this is trying to talk to these people who are driving the economy. What is the reaction when you go to people and say, well, you're going to be on the NBR Rich List?
It's mixed. I think it's improving since we have changed the approach and we've been telling the people, this is what we're trying to do. We are trying to do this profit and purpose story rather than just, tell us about all your assets, tell us about your fancy toys. So, well over half engage with us in some shape or form. Not everyone will give us sort of on the record comments or talk to us extensively in an interview, but we are, I think people are recognising that we are trying to build a big catalogue of profiles, interesting stories, which I think is a very valuable resource.
Do you still get that sense of people being afraid of the tall poppy syndrome or any sort of feedback saying, oh, these just wealthy people?
Yeah, and several of the listers this year did sort of talk about that, and that is part of our coverage this year. Is that idea I mentioned at the start of commercial success is not a sin. Yeah. Despite that, a lot of people in New Zealand and quite a few of our listers who we quote in the features as part of our coverage this year do talk about, if I was in America building a business, people would think I'm a legend because they love business, they love enterprise. But in New Zealand, you almost don't tell people that you're in business because it's seen as big-headedness or showing off. Right. And so quite a few of the rich listers this year were saying we do need to get a bit better at celebrating success and actually, we hold up our sports stars as our leading lights in New Zealand. Why don't we celebrate business people in the same sort of way?
It's an ongoing conversation. But as you say, you reach out to these people because they are, sort of growing the economy a lot. They're doing a lot of amazing and different things. But every year there's a theme when you talk to them. What did NBR ask the listers this year?
So this year, broadly, the theme is elevating New Zealand Inc. Yeah. And so the idea there is, how can we take the country forward? What sort of things should we be doing to help make New Zealand a better place for doing business? And so we asked every rich lister that exact question. What's the one thing that we could do to make New Zealand a better place for doing business?
I'm sure you just didn't get one answer, though.
No, we didn't. In fact, we got dozens of responses and some really interesting responses as well. I mean, there were some themes, particularly around overseas investment and education. I won't give too much away just yet, but there were some common themes where a lot of the rich listers were very hot on this is what needs to change and why. And then there were some other interesting ideas in there as well, particularly around things like tax and regulation. No shortage of ideas. Right. And as I mentioned at the start as well, big political donors. So
we'll have to read about everybody's answer. Last year was a big year for the list. Because there was an upset in terms of rankings for the first time in I don't know how many years. Graham Hartwood had been at the top of the list and he was knocked off by the Mowbray brothers, Nick and Matt from Zuru. So any sort of clues around what's happening at the top there this year?
Yeah, 20 years Graham Hart was
20
at the
years.
Top. So yeah, that was a big story last year. Starting with the Mowbrays. Yep, obviously they've had an interesting year at Zuru. They produce pretty much all of their goods in China, and US President Donald Trump has whacked
not keen on China,
a whopping great tariff on products there. And the Zuru Group also exports about $2 billion a year worth of product from China to the States. Wow. And so what was the tariff at one point, 130% or something? It's come back. It'll probably change again before this comes out. But it's an interesting time for them. They are still growing really, really strongly, and they've still had a very strong, profitable year, but there are clearly some headwinds out there. So we've got an update on them and how they're doing in the face of all of that. Otherwise, in terms of this year, we've got a brand new feature that we're introducing. All right. So we've got a whole separate other list on the side.
Okay, a new feature. All right, tell me about it.
Yeah, we're launching our first MBR Womens List, which profiles 14 of the country's leading and most successful businesswomen.
Why do this? So this is the first time, right? So why do it?
This is the first time. So way back in 2019, actually, with the release of the Rich List, NBR published a feature as part of its coverage, which pointed out the fact that out of sort of 250 odd profiles, only about 20 were women.
Wow.
So we, back then, were asking the question, why so few women?
Yep.
Last year on the list, there were no women on the list in their own right.
Yep.
So we've got lots of families and couples and the like, but no just sort of standalone
Individual.
women.
Yeah.
This year, we have two newcomers who are women, so Anna Mowbray and Lucy Liu.
Yep.
That combined with, some prominent local businesswomen and the community sort of encouraging us to take a look at this, sort of gave us the idea to look at, what could we do as part of our Rich List coverage to sort of highlight successful businesswomen as well. And so while two of the people on the Women's List are also featured in the main Rich List,
yep.
we have another dozen who aren't quite there, but have already achieved or are still growing and achieving lots of growth, who we've also profiled on the side.
So what was the criteria for selecting the 14 women? Obviously, 2 have made it to the list, which means more than 100 mil. But the other 12?
So since we tweaked the Rich List format a few years ago on the back of COVID to make the threshold for inclusion broadly $100 million valuation, that sort of cut a lot of the women that we did have featured on the list. So we've sort of started at an entry point of about 20 million.
Okay.
And so basically the dozen profiled who aren't on the main Rich List but are on the Women's List, they're worth roughly between 20 mil and 100. I think a couple of them in that list might be worth slightly more than that, but this is our first Women's List. We're sort of starting here. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's a start, and we intend to grow it from here as well.
Okay, so one thing I picked up on, though, is that you're giving a broad range between 20 and 100 million, but you're not publishing an estimated individual wealth, like so-and-so is worth, say, $85 million.
Yeah.
Why is that?
It's not really what it's supposed to be about this time around. I mean, in each of the profiles, we've got some pretty strong clues as to what we think they're roughly worth. A lot of that is based off companies that they've led, which have sold, capital raises they've done, things like that, just the general size of the businesses that they've led. But the threshold is different. The idea behind this list is a bit different. It's not necessarily about what we think they're worth. It's more we think they have built really successful and interesting businesses.
Right.
The reason why we've sort of gone with at least 20 million is we think that's sort of a yardstick by which we can say, yes, that does look like a successful business.
Well, it is a celebration of their success.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. So, like all the listers, you've gone out to the women who you've included on this list. What's been their reaction?
Good, actually.
Yeah.
We've interviewed most of them.
Okay.
Only a few sort of didn't want to participate at all, but we've still profiled them. But most were up for it.
Is that different from the blokes?
It is. Yeah. Maybe it's because there's no valuation. That's helped.
Okay.
But quite a few of them. Naomi Ballantyne is one.
Yeah.
She is behind Partners Life, which she sees as the first female-founded New Zealand company to sell for $1 billion. That was a deal a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
That didn't make her a billionaire, but she did make lots of money out of that. She was really up for it. She sort of talks about, in a really extensive video interview she did with us as part of the Rich List coverage this year, she talks about the fact that before that sale, no one really knew who she was, and she didn't mind that at the time, but equally it was kind of sad because she was a businesswoman and she thinks we should talk about the success of businesswomen a lot more than we do as well. So, we got some really good stories, some really good sort of tips, and just a different perspective as well.
Yeah.
A lot of the businesswomen face slightly different challenges or have slightly different stories to tell. Brooke Roberts from Sharesies, the investment platform, for instance, she talks about a story about. She was one of the company's CEOs, and she was the company was going through a funding round, and one of the investors asked her what her pregnancy meant for the company while she was raising money, which is obviously not something that affects a lot of our listeners. So it's just little stories like that, and just gives us a different perspective and view on commit.
Will we be surprised by who is on there?
Most of the names people will recognise. I think some of the names people won't necessarily recognise just how successful the businesses they've built have been. There's some pretty big numbers and some pretty big companies that we've profiled as part of this.
Yep.
So I think a few surprises in there, but most people will have heard of most of these people.
Okay, then. All right. So we've cracked 100 billion. But everybody always wants to know about the top 10, not necessarily, who's on the top, but the top 10. Has there been a lot of movement there?
There's been a little bit of movement, actually. Mostly, one big decliner and one big gainer.
Okay.
So we'll start with the bad news first. The Todd family, which has been around for generations, mostly based out of Wellington. We've knocked them down several $100 million this year.
Wow.
So they have dropped from about 4.3 billion last year to 3.5 billion this year. They've had a really rough couple of years with some ill-fated investments, so we've had to take account of those. On the good side of the ledger, the Goodman family, which is behind the ASX-listed Goodman property empire.
Property.
Property and data centres as well.
Okay, data
I've got
centres.
into data centres. So we have lifted them from in the 3 billions last year to 5 billion this year. Sort of reflecting that growth, perhaps reflecting a little bit of us not revaluing them properly for a little while. So we've sort of come into some new information and understand that they're probably doing a bit better than we've been recognising for a little while.
Yeah.
So, but they have had a series of couple of really strong years, and they've got some really interesting projects on the go at the moment as well.
So overall, though, 100 billion. That's where we've ended up.
Yeah, we have cracked 100 bill. So I think as recently as, say, 2 years ago, we were about 80.
Okay.
So a fair chunk of that growth was in the Mowbrays going from 3.5 bill to 20 bill in 1 year.
Wow.
But that said, we do have a dozen newcomers this year, which have added about $5 billion between them to the list as well. So, there have been winners and losers this year, even for the country's richest and most successful business people. Tariff uncertainty, global turmoil, economic downturn does impact a lot of these businesses, and we do share a lot of those stories in the list as well.
Right.
But overall, they are still growing and growing strongly. And we've cracked 100 bill this year, which is a pretty incredible number.
And that's it for this episode of the MBR podcast. Thanks to content producers Jake Latham and Joseph Hisayasu. To dig deeper, head to the MBR list on our website to see who's up, who's down, and who's new, and of course, how much they are all worth. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you next time.